Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to write our very first Python code using the idle shell we downloaded last time. By the end of this video, you'll be able to write your own basic math equations in Python. And we're going to break all of this down step by step. We'll be going through things like the basic math operators in Python. Things like how do you tell Python to do addition, subtraction, multiplication, and a few other operators as well. We'll also talk a little bit about how Python processes these equations in the background. We'll introduce key concepts like precedence, which is really central to understanding why Python gives you the output that it actually does. And probably most exciting, we will introduce your first two data types. I'm not going to spoil the surprise on exactly what these are right now, but you'll find out in just a couple of minutes. So that's pretty much what we're going to be going over today. There is definitely a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. This is the Python shell, and the shell is going to be a really useful tool for us when we're learning because it allows us to write a single line of Python code and then executes it right away. So we write a line, we press enter, and the shell will execute it. And when we're learning, again, that's going to be perfect because really the best way to learn a programming language is to experiment and play around in the language and kind of just see what happens. This will allow us to test the behavior of the language and start to become more familiar with it. So looking at the shell here, we can see that each line starts with 3 greater than signs and then has a blinking cursor. And the blinking cursor is basically the shell's way of saying, hey, I'm ready for you to write some code and I'm going to execute that code for you. So the shell is indicating to us that it is ready. And in order for us to write code, we need to understand a concept called syntax. Now, syntax, if you haven't heard of this word before, is basically the rules of a language. And this is not something specific to programming languages either. So we can look at English as an example. English has its own syntax. And English's syntax says that this is the way we can arrange different words and phrases together to create a correct sentence. In other words, a sentence that other people who speak English will also understand. So let's actually look at an example here. Hello, I am learning how to write code. Now, when I wrote this sentence, I actually followed some of the rules of English. For example, I started this sentence with a capital letter. Why did I do that? Because the English language tells us that all sentences start with a capital letter. So we're following English's syntax here. I also wrote this word ending, the word learn, ending in an ing to make it learning. And that's to show that this is something we're doing now. This is something we're actively doing. It's in the present tense. And one more example is I put this exclamation mark at the end here. And basically what this does is shows excitement because we're learning how to write code. We're very excited about it. And in English, an exclamation mark is a way that you can express that. Now, similarly to the way that all these rules exist in English to convey an idea, Python also has its own rules that we need to follow when we're writing Python code. Now, the way this line is right now, I clearly wrote it in English. So what if I tried to send this to the shell as Python code? What do we think would happen? Let's actually try it. So all we need to do to send this to the shell, tell the shell to execute it, is press enter at the end. And it's the first time Python's talking back to us. So Python's saying syntax error, invalid syntax. And now that we've kind of talked about what syntax is, this probably is starting to make some sense. So syntax error is basically saying, hey, the line of code you wrote me does not follow my syntax because it doesn't follow Python's syntax, which is causing an error. So this is something Python can't understand. It's not following the rules of Python, and it's just giving us a syntax error because of that. So let's try something a little more familiar to a computer like numbers. And by the way, as we're going through this, I really encourage you to open up the shell, follow along with me, and actually type out the examples. Coding is something you really need to try out for yourself. It's a very learn by doing type of skill, so definitely the more practice you can get as we're doing this together, the better. So let's go ahead and type the number 1 into the shell and press enter. And we can see that Python actually responds back with 1. So we didn't get a syntax error, that's good, and that means that Python at least understood what we said to it. And at first, it may seem a little bit confusing that Python responded with 1, but if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. We typed the number 1 in. We didn't really ask Python to do anything with that number. So we sort of just said, hey, here's the number 1, and Python's like, yep, this is the number 1. Because we didn't really ask it to do anything. So a more interesting example might be just basic addition. And the addition symbol in Python is the plus sign. So if I want to say add the numbers 1 and 2 together, I would write 1 plus 2, similar to how you'd write it in math, and Python responds back with 3. So this is pretty much what we'd expect. And we can do the same thing with other basic math operations as well. So I could try 1 minus 2, for example, and I get back negative 1. If I want to do 1 times 2, the multiplication sign is the asterisk, so I would do 1 times 2, and I get back 2. And another thing I want to point out here is right now I'm bunching all the numbers together. And by that I mean I'm not adding any spaces. Python doesn't care if we do spaces, so feel free to write it like this, like I just did. You can also, if you wanted to for some reason, add a bunch of spaces, and it doesn't make any difference to Python. So this line, this line, this line are all exactly the same to Python. Usually we just add spaces, probably like this example here, to make it a little bit more readable for us. Another example we could try is 8 times 4, and we get back 32. Now, if we tried to divide those same two numbers, let's try 8 divided by 4. The forward slash is the division symbol. Then we get back 2. But we actually got back 2.0, which is a little weird because all the other numbers we got back don't have a decimal in it. And this is because Python actually has two types of numbers. It has something called ints and it has something called floats. Ints are short for integers, and they are whole numbers that do not have decimal places. So all the numbers we've seen so far, with the exception of this one, are ints. Floats, on the other hand, are anything with a decimal point. So 2.0 is an example of a float. I could also write 3.14, short for the number pi. I could also write 0.5. And as we just saw here, we could write 2.0. And this one's pretty interesting because this is a whole number, but we're also including a decimal in it. And Python only cares if we're including a decimal or not. So whereas 2.0 is a float, the number 2 is an int. Python only cares if there's a decimal there. And now we just learned the two basic data types of Python, ints and floats. And these are going to come up all the time. They're really basic building blocks for working with numbers and really doing a lot of things in Python. So far, we've been doing math one operation at a time, but Python allows us to do more complicated expressions as well. So let's take a look at this right here. 10 plus 2 times 5. It might not be immediately obvious exactly how Python's going to evaluate this. There's kind of two ways you can interpret it. If we did 10 plus 2 first, we would get 12 times 5, and the answer would be 60. Or if we do 2 times 5 first, we would get 10 plus 10, and the answer will be 20. If you remember from math class, we always do multiplication before addition. So if Python follows the same rules, we would think that the answer would be 20. And it looks like it does. So as you can see up here, these are the PEMDAS rules, or you may have heard it referred to as please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. There's a lot of different acronyms people use for this, but this describes the order of precedence in which you do math operations. So from top to bottom, we'll do parentheses first, exponents, then multiplication and division, ordered from left to right in the expression, and addition and subtraction, also ordered from left to right. So because Python follows this rule, when it looked at this expression, it said, hey, I'm going to do 2 times 5 first and get 10, and then I'm going to add 10 plus 10 and get 20. And that's how this was evaluated. So let's try to do some of these other operations we see here. We haven't done anything with exponents yet, so let's actually try that. So to do that, I'm going to start with this same operation, And a way that you can copy one line to the next available line is you can put your cursor to the end of it and press the enter button. Okay, so I'm going to start with this expression, and now we're going to say 5 to the second power. And this is the symbol for exponents in Python. So this is 10 plus 2 times 5 to the second power. And go ahead and pause the video and try to figure out how Python's actually going to evaluate this. So working through the order of operations, we're going to start with exponents, and we're going to do 5 to the second power is 25. The next one is going to be multiplication, and we're going to do 2 times 25 and get 50. And then we're going to do 10 plus 50 and get 60. So if I did that right, we should get back 60. Okay, and it looks like that's what Python's doing as well. Another interesting thing you can do is use parentheses to force the order of operations. So we can see that parentheses has the first precedence, it's the highest priority. So we can actually surround 10 and 2 in parentheses here. And this is going to tell Python to do 10 plus 2 first, even though the exponent has a higher priority than multiplication and addition, it doesn't have as high one as parentheses. So now what Python's going to do is 10 plus 2 is 12, and then it's going to evaluate the other side of the multiplication symbol, which is 5 to the second power, which is 25. And then we get back 12 times 25, and we get back 300. And by the way, if you don't trust my math on what 12 times 25 was, you don't have to take my word for it anymore because we now know how to ask Python. So we could just say, hey, Python, what is 12 times 25? And we get back 300. So definitely go ahead and try to create your own math expressions from here. And before you actually press enter, try to figure out exactly how Python's going to evaluate them according to the order of operations. This is going to really help you understand what's going on in the background with Python and learn what to expect when you do math operations within Python. So that's going to be it for today. I really hope you guys found this video useful. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you press the like button down below. And if you want to see more from me in the future, maybe press the subscribe button right over here as well. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.